Open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 8. Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 1. We'll be reading, "For he does whatever pleases him. Where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say to him, 'What are you doing?' He who keeps his command will experience nothing harmful, and a wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. Because for every matter there is a time and judgment, though the misery of man increases greatly. For he does not know what will happen, so who can tell him when it will occur? No one has power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, and no one has power in the day of death. There is no release from that war, and wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. All this I have seen and applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There is a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt." You may be seated. So in chapter 7 of Ecclesiastes, we were talking about how what's being criticized there is this view of an alternate good. You remember the book as a whole is teaching us how to think about what is good. And so the answer that's put forward for us is given to us at the end of the book. It starts with the wrong answer, everything's meaningless, and it deconstructs all of the efforts to put forward some sort of a false good. It goes through and eliminates them in a systematic way. So it starts with everything's meaningless and shows all these meaningless views. And it occasionally interrupts with the right view. When we get to the end, and we're reminded in chapter 12, in verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. In other words, this is the chief end of man. That's telling us how to glorify God. Fear him, which is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge, and to keep his commandments, which is how you live a life to grow in knowing God. It goes on to say, "For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil." And so we're reminded that there's not merely a goal, but also the means matter. The steps along the way matter, because every single action, secret or public, will be brought to remembrance. It will not be forgotten. It will be remembered, and it will be made maximally public. The whole assembly of men and angels to ever live in the triune God, with a theanthropic mediator, Christ himself being present in his human nature. All of that, every action will be seen in that context. And so anything that makes you think that something can be meaningless is maximally undermined and destroyed. So when we get to chapter 8, we've just come off of this examination of reputation as the good. Right? Chapter 7 began with, "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death and the day of one's birth." So this good name was the theme throughout chapter 7. And we get to the beginning of chapter 8, and it's sort of this bridge, because it concludes for us thinking about reputation. And we've thought about reasons why reputation isn't the good, doesn't work, and how if you pursue reputation as the good, it tends to make men foppish. In other words, it tends to make them more concerned about ornamentation and pleasing people. It makes you a bit of a dandy. It makes you concerned for the opinions of women too much. It makes it so that you think about, how can I interact with women to get their approval? And so the woman who wants to manipulate a man then is empowered, and her heart, which is a net, is able to trap. And so we talk about how this idea of pursuing reputation as the good actually destroys the order of things, inverts things. And so then we conclude that with the idea of the wise man, and there's something interesting about wisdom. Wisdom has this effect. Wisdom makes it so that a man can rightly interpret things. He will start to avoid those nets that others do not see. He will not be concerned about pleasing any manipulators. He will begin to become more and more defended against those that are nets. And in addition to that, he is going to not merely be changed in the inward man, but he is going to carry himself in a way that is delightful to men. And so wisdom yields reputation. Wisdom makes a man's face to shine. It causes the countenance of a man to be different. Wisdom causes a man to have joy. Wisdom causes a man to have confidence. Wisdom causes a man to be able to become a leader of men. Wisdom changes the sternness or strength of the face. As opposed to a dour face, or as opposed to always trying to be pleasing in a way where there's fake smiles, instead, the face shines in an appropriate way for the moment. And when we think about the shining of the face, we should be reminded, like I mentioned to you previously, of Stephen, whose face shined as he was about to be martyred, or of Moses, and we're about to get there in Exodus 34, after looking at the back of the glory of God, with this idea of the shining of the face. That there's, as you look upon the glory of God, as you know God, as you see the invisible attributes of the invisible God, that wisdom stored up in you has the effect of making your countenance or face to shine. And so a part of the power of the Christian witness in the world is the way in which wisdom causes men to change, to carry themselves differently, to have an appropriate countenance, as well as to speak differently and to behave and act differently. And we get into this time of thinking about the idea of interacting with kings. Do you remember in Nehemiah, at the beginning of Nehemiah? Nehemiah is in the presence of the king and the queen, which would be Ahasuerus and Esther. And he is downcast, and Ahasuerus says to him, I have never seen you downcast before. What is going on? It was so startling to him to see Nehemiah downcast. And so that idea that Nehemiah knew how to carry himself in the presence of kings. He knew how to appropriately go before the king and to be able to control himself, to exercise self-control, and to come before that king and to serve him well and wisely and to make it so that there was no distraction from the public business due. To not be an additional burden to that king, but to come to that king and to help him to rule and to come into his presence in a way that would make it so that king was pleased to see him. We're going to read about some things that are kind of the opposite of what Nehemiah generally did. Nehemiah went to the presence of the king and encouraged the king to want him to be around. And I'll tell you what, I assure you, being in the presence of the king was not an easy and delightful thing all the time for Nehemiah. Do you find it easy to hide every perturbation of your heart? Or do you find it to be an exertion of energy to have to control your countenance and to make it so that you look like you're fine? It's an exertion of energy. There's a relief when you're around some people that you feel as though you can express the troubles of your heart and to show them the ways in which you're exhausted or tired or the ways in which you are troubled. There's a relief of it. And so one of the reasons you do that around a king is because you're worried about the interference of the king. The other reason is because you're worried about getting the displeasure of the king. And so Nehemiah, when he went in, he would control himself, except for that time when he heard about the troubles of the people of Judah in Jerusalem. And he desired to ask the king to be able to go. And so his countenance was a thing that was used to draw out. Now Ahasuerus, caring about Nehemiah, asked, "What's wrong?" Husbands, if you see your wives in a troubled condition where their countenance is down, you view that and you go, "What's wrong? Let me find out what is troubling her heart." When you see your children downcast, you do the same. If you find that it's for every little thing, your goal is to go, "Okay, we need to help to teach you to toughen up." But if you find that they're troubled by something serious, you seek to help them with it and to settle their hearts. Wisdom makes it so that a man can control his countenance. This is a part of the "you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." It makes it so you're not a slave to your emotions. You're not a slave to however you feel being expressed externally. Instead, wisdom makes a man to control his face and to control his countenance. And that includes in terms of not being unnecessarily stern. This idea of being able to cause a place to be filled with joy and to have your presence generally be a positive thing. Now, we change into this subject going into the king. The verses that follow, verses 2 through 9, are going to present to us now a beginning of a theme that's going to be unrolled. What's going to happen following up here for a couple of chapters is Solomon's going to go on a particularly pleasant thought side road. And here's the thought side road. Without God, death ruins everything. Everything's terrible because you're going to die. You're going to die someday, so you can't really enjoy anything. That's kind of the point he goes through. And the reason he does this is because men must wrestle with the problem of mortality. And when men consider mortality, when they enter into the house of mourning, when they think about the fact that they will die, their days are numbered, what happens is they begin to look for something that is lasting. And as you look for something that's lasting, you begin to realize the only thing that's lasting is wisdom. The only thing that's lasting is the knowledge of God. The only thing that's lasting is that. And this desire to know God more and then to see others know God more and to apply the knowledge of God more. So it's to draw you out of the present. And it begins to deal with this by attacking the fear of man in the strongest position. We just came out of this reputation stuff, and we're talking about reputation and the idea of the heart of a woman being a snare. And so you might go, "It's fine. I'm not going to be foppish. I'm not going to be concerned about making sure that all the women like me. I'm not going to pursue the good pleasure of women to approve of me and to make sure that all the backroom chatter is positive about me. Instead, I will seek the approval of kings." And Solomon begins to mock that. That's what this passage is. This is a mockery of caring that all the magistrates think that you're the best thing ever. So you might go, "I'm going to chase after the favor of powerful men." So it starts out, and it sounds totally reasonable. "I say, keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God." Which, by the way, I think there's echoes of that one line in Romans 13. You obey the ordinance of God. You obey the magistrate because he's an ordinance of God. Think about this. If you say, "I swear to obey the king," and the king commands you to do something that dishonors the God in whose name you swore, does your oath to obey that king in the name of God obligate you to dishonor God? Sometimes people act like it does. It does not. If you swear to obey some human, in the name of the triune God that establishes the authority of that ordinance, whereby that person has authority. You swear to obey them, and then they tell you to do something God forbids or forbid you to do something that God commands. It would be a violation of that oath of obedience to then obey them. Because the obligation of obedience is dependent upon the God in whose name you swore. And so we begin here with this. I say, keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God. Do not be hasty to go from his presence. This is a good piece of advice, and I'll unpack that one in a minute. Do not take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever pleases him. This is where the absurdity begins. Do kings do whatever pleases them? Are kings able to do all their pleasure? Do kings get to do all their goodwill? Is all that a king desires accomplished? Sometimes we stupidly think so. But all you need to do is read the history of kings, even just in the Bible. And you will find king after king after king with desires that go unfulfilled. Lands he hoped to conquer that led into his captivity. The desire to accomplish something, to change the nation in some way, to alter things under his power, and he couldn't do it. Kings can get frustrated like toddlers. Do not take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever pleases him. The not taking stand for an evil thing, that's valuable to get. But is the reason because a king does whatever pleases him? No, this is a reminder. Who is the one who actually does whatever he pleases? God. So what we have here is this idea of, hey, obey the king because of the oath to God. And hey, be careful to not resist the king, and be careful to not take an evil stand because kings do whatever they please. This is remarkably intelligent mockery of those who would think that obeying kings is the best life. Where the word of a king is, there's power. Now, in a general sense, that's true. When kings rule and they command a thing, they get done more than the things that other men command. But it's not like kings' decrees are like the decrees of God. When God says a thing, it happens. He says, let there be light, and there's light. He makes a thing by speaking it. Kings are not so. And do you think that Solomon, the richest, most powerful, judgment? This is referring back to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, he was commending wisdom and the knowledge of God. He is giving us all these breadcrumbs. If you know about God, you know obeying God is the thing that makes it so that no harm comes to you. The word of God is the word of power. God is the one who does all that he pleases. And obeying a king rather than obeying God is foolish. All of these things are being stacked up. And a wise man actually can discern when is it time to disobey a king. For he does not know what will happen. So who can tell him when it will occur? This is a continued deconstruction of assuming that if you can get the king's pleasure, that it will bring about your ultimate good. You can try to manipulate kings, but I'll tell you what, just real quick, who do you think goes through the most manipulation of like any people? Who are the people that manipulators most target? Is there a name for people whose professional job is to seek to control the activities of rulers? Like lobbyists? There's an entire class of persons whose job it is to try to get rulers to act in the manner they want. The rich want to get the ruler to do something for them. The general population wants to get the ruler to do something for them. There are many people with many crying pleas who want to get rulers to do things for them. There are no class of persons on the planet who have so many people asking them to do so many things as rulers. The more power you get, the more public your figure, the more there are people trying to manipulate you and to get things out of you that they want. So, do you think that by interacting with rulers that you can predictably know the outcome you're going to get by interacting with them? No. We're told in Proverbs, there are no things in this creaturely side of things that are more inscrutable than the hearts of kings, because they get so used to getting manipulated and asked for things that they become slow to promise. And they don't reveal all their thoughts because they have to manage the people that they deal with. And so there is this interacting with other people. There's this way in which kings can become hard-hearted and manipulative. The temptation of being around powerful people is to manipulate them to get things out of them. And the temptation of being powerful is to manipulate people so you can get them to do what you want with the least investment. And you don't know what's going to happen. As a king, you don't know what's going to happen. And as the person trying to manipulate the king, you don't know what's going to happen, much less when it's going to happen. And even if the king promises you something and plans to do it, he could die that night. He could be toppled that morning. Another can take his throne. So the wise man knows that he doesn't know what's going to happen, and therefore he doesn't know when it's going to happen. No one has power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit. You can have the king's favor, and then you can die. You can be on top of the world. You think about the story of Esther. How good did Haman think things were? I'm going to defeat my enemies. I'm building a really tall gallows or cross or impaling stick, depending on the commentator you read. I'm going to defeat Mordecai. I'm the prime minister. Everything's amazing because I have the favor of Ahasuerus. And then all of a sudden, Esther invites him to a feast, and he goes, things are even better. Gets invited to a second feast, things are even better. Comes in, and the king's favor turns to wrath, and he is impaled on his own petard. No one has power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit. No one has power in the day of death. You can't cause death. You can't stop it. There is no release from that war. What war? The war against death. Every moment of your life is a fighting against dying. You walk around, try not to trip. Careful to go downstairs. You don't run in front of cars. You eat, you drink. You do all these things that are meant to keep you alive. There is no release from that war. And wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. So doing evil is not a thing that's going to guarantee that you can save yourself from death. Doing evil is not the best path of war against the enemy, death. Is there some victory over death? If this war keeps going, how can we overcome the enemy, death? And so there's one king to look to for his favor to defeat that enemy, death. That king is the Lord Jesus Christ, who conquered death. He stepped upon the head of the serpent, and he was raised from the dead. And he was the first fruits. And we will all be resurrected, either unto spiritual life or spiritual death. And so you will be resurrected, and the question is, which resurrection will you have? Those who believe in the King. Those who believe his word and know that his commandments are right. The followers of that one King. They have victory and release from that war. Apart from the knowledge of God, apart from wisdom is the true good. There is no release from that war. We have released from that war, and we know that to live as Christ, we get to do good things for the glory of Christ, and to die rather than the defeat, rather than the end. To die is gain, because we enter his presence, the presence of his human nature. There's no release from that war, and wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. All this I have seen and applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. Under the sun. What he's doing is he's saying from an under the sun perspective rather than under heaven. Remember, under heaven is the throne of God, the law word of God, the reign of God over every event in history, so providential rule, the judgment seat of God, where he will bring everything to remembrance, every secret thing. That's under heaven. Under the sun, a quiet universe with no God who has spoken. On one side, we have the God who is there, the God who has spoken. On the other side, the highest thing is the Son. All this I've seen, applied my heart to every work that's done under the sun. He is mocking the care for the concern of kings from an under the sun perspective. There's a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. And so then he flips the script right there. Not only is seeking the favor of kings not the good, but being the king is not the good. And he's already done that, right? He already deconstructed that. Earlier on, he already talked about, I had all the power I wanted to do everything I wanted. I could get all the pleasures I want. I built all the things. I had all the things. I did all the things. And man, it was not sufficient. And so he reminds us, there's a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. If you have authority and you don't use it for service, and you don't use it for the glory of God, your authority will bring more coals on your head in the day of judgment. Increasing authority brings increased responsibility. And so here is the silliness of chasing after the favor of kings and the silliness of thinking that being the king is that which will make everything good. Now, having walked through this deconstruction of this false good, there are also in here some wise pieces of counsel about how to interact with kings to get their favor. So even while mocking the position, he gives you good counsel about how to properly still care about the favor of kings. One is this: when you serve under a covenantal authority like a magistrate and you take an oath, you ought to be very careful about that oath. Careful in taking it, careful to do it. To recognize that the keeping of oaths bring blessing and the breaking of oaths bring curse. And so we should not merely look upon the exception of when we have to resist, but to be careful to take very seriously the duty of obedience to covenantal authorities. Do not be hasty to go from his presence. It is burdensome to be around authority. It's burdensome to be around authority. Because the problem is when the authority's around, you don't always get to do whatever you feel like doing. And so there can be the temptation to think, yes, yes, authority, wonderful. I want to honor them. Let the authority be blessed, and may God keep it far away from me. This desire to have the authority in theory and to have the authority be away from you. We should desire lawful authorities. To live in an anarchic state is like what Deacon Schaefer was talking about before. You will have a thirst for authority if you live long in anarchy. You will crave that there would be authority to stop the wild men. And so it is good to desire authority and to be under the wing of those who are lawful authorities. We should all desire to come under the wing of Yahweh. We should all desire to come under the wing of protection of lawful magistrates. We should all desire to come under the wing of lawful church authority. And we should all desire to be under the wing of lawful patriarchs or matriarchs, unless and until you are one. And when you're in those positions, there's a burden you carry as the sun beats on you, so that it will not beat on those under your wing. There's a desire to exit the presence of those in authorities, that we can do what we want, and to not worry about their engagement, their interference, to not have to do the work of honoring them. You might think there's a burden of being around people who are more gifted than you because you have to honor their gifts. And you go, but what if I lived in a world without their gifts? What kind of hell would it be to live in a world where you're the most gifted in every sphere? Have you ever thought of the hellish condition of being the most skilled person in everything? How terrible of a world would that be, where everybody is less gifted than you in everything? I'm so grateful for the giftings of others to have built things and given things and do things. There are so many ways that I benefit from the work and mastery of others, the superiority of others around me in many, many things. And to live in a world where all I can do is the best that anybody could do on anything would be horrific. And so the absence of those gifts would make it so that you go, how glorious are other gifts from other men, that I can delight in them. You ever thought about how much better your life is because other people make music or technology or foods that you don't know how to make, or that they do things that organize and make life better in ways that you don't know how to do it, the ways we enjoy the benefit of other people's giftings? We have a duty to honor those giftings. With the aged, you might think, if it's my duty to stand when the gray hairs walk into the room, and it's my duty to let age speak first and then youth, you might say, what a burden, I'd like to talk, and I'd rather stay sitting. But to live in a world where there are no people who are older than you, who have not more experience, who haven't done other things, to live in a place where you're the one who is the oldest, the most experienced, and the most mature, the burdens that befall for that. There is a greatness of having others that can tell you of things they have already done, and you can help to show you paths that you didn't know existed. And so there's a joy that we have having the aged, having the gifted, and having authorities. Magistrates to keep back the wild men, officers to stop heresy and immorality from running wild, parents to nurture and raise and guard and protect women from cads, and to protect young men from harlots. And so rather than seeking to escape the presence of rulers, to consider it a joy, a delight, an opportunity to be in the presence. We shouldn't be manipulative to authorities, but we should desire to please them. We should have reverence for them, which means we should have a fondness or a desire for their good, a liking of them. There should be an admiring that exists and an affection. So think about the affection piece in terms of liking. Then there is this idea of respect, which is an admiration, a thinking highly of, a valuing. And the reason to want to get out of the way is because of the third piece, the fear. If you have only fear, but you have no affection and you have no admiration, then all you want to do when you think of kings is to get out of their way. You want to get away from them. But we're to have reverence, which is an affection, an admiration, and a fear for lawful authority. So rather than merely a fear and the desire to be left alone, we should have this respect and love as well as the fear. And that's what reverence is. We also shouldn't take our stand for evil things against kings. Lawful authority exists to be a pressure and a coercive power or a use of some type of exercise of authority to stop evil. Don't take your stand against the authority to do evil. There are some heroic men who must face the power of empires for the sake of righteousness. But oftentimes, people merely rebel to do what they want. If you're not governing yourself well, if you're not governing the things under your domain well, it is unlikely that you are then in a position where you're going to be pushing against lawful authority. If you're doing horrific sin in an unordered condition, your household's a mess, your personal life is terrible, the probability of you heroically resisting tyranny, when you're not resisting the tyranny of the devil and sin over yourself, is very low. Living peaceably and quietly and well and in a beautiful way, in holiness and righteousness, according to wisdom, is a life that prepares you to then resist tyranny when you have to. Don't take your stand for living in an evil way. Don't take your stand for an evil thing. Kings do have power. They're not omnipotent, but they are pretty potent. They have a pretty decent amount of power. And God, who judges all evil, is omnipotent. Where the word of the king is, there's power. Well, not in the same way as God, but they do have more power when they speak than most men. And there are very few who can cause them to be judged. It takes a tenth of a nation to gather together with a Puritan parliament to lop off the head of Charles I. It takes 3% of the country in the United States to resist a king 3,000 miles away for 8 years. It takes 80 years of the Dutch being persecuted by a Spanish empire for them to be able to throw off a power of a king that would keep them. It takes 30 years for the Germans, the Protestant princes there, to lose all of their property so that the Swedes can come in and lose a huge army and a great king, and for the French to then come in and sort of kind of save them. 30 years of German Protestants fighting against an emperor, and they sort of continued to exist. Resisting kings is hard. Resisting kings is hard. It is no small matter to resist tyrants. And if you can avoid fighting kings unnecessarily, it is a great blessing to keep peace when you can. We must be courageous and willing to resist the greatest of men for the sake of the glory of God, but when we can, we should avoid having to fight kings. So we look at all of this. There's great power with the king. We should desire to be in the presence of authorities. We should not stand against authorities to do evil. We should be careful about our oaths. We should recognize that kings have much power, and so it is a good thing when you can get their favor, and a good thing when you can avoid having to fight them. Generally speaking, when you, in verse 5, keep the commandment of lawful authority, you avoid harm. The fifth commandment has a promise of blessing, long life and prosperity. You must be wise to discern the time and to judge rightly. You must study the law of God and study theology so that you can judge about politics. There is a flood of young men who are clamoring to talk about politics. They love it. Power is like a shot of whiskey. There is this desire to talk about, when I am king, when I rule, when I control the productive activities of other people, then everything will be great. When I can just make everybody give me all their stuff, and then I'll decide how to hand it out as my gift. Then justice will reign, and everything will be wonderful. Justice will roll down mountains like water. But that's not how it works. Until you're productive, you're not ready to rule. There is this desire for power, and people love to talk about power and how kings ought to behave, and that is talking about things that are too high for most people. If you can't govern yourself well, you can't govern a house well, if you're not ready for local office, then what are you talking about? If you haven't studied theology and the law of God, how will you judge times? How will you know what is wise to do when? If the book of Proverbs has not been sucked up into your heart, how will you know how to discern times and powers? I want young men to be strong. I want young men to desire power. I want young men to be righteous, and I want them to show Numbers and Deuteronomy that tell rulers how to rule. Kings were required to write, depending on how you interpret it, either the first 5 books of the Bible by hand or at least the book of Deuteronomy by hand, and to keep that copy written by their own hands with them as they ruled. The studying in detail, having written out every letter by your own hand, signing it as the covenant. You covenanted with God. Power is a good thing, and the favor of rulers is a good thing. And the most important power to appease is God. And the most important favor to get is the favor of God. And if you want to rule, you need wisdom, you need theology, you need the law of God. There is this need to study these things deeply, to study the details of these things deeply, and to not lean on your own wisdom, but to go and study, what does the Bible say? You know, I had a debate, I think yesterday, 5 years ago, one of those two. And one of the things that came up was just this idea of how do you deal with who controls what? And there's places that deal with the details of governance, like where we're told in Deuteronomy that when there's a dead body found in the wilderness, who's supposed to investigate? And it said, you measure which city it's closest to. In other words, which county does it fit into? If you don't have a clearly GPS demarked boundary between the two little counties, how do you deal with this in 1000 BC or 1500 BC? You deal with it by measuring which town center is it closest to, and the elders of that town are the ones who now have to investigate and deal with the matter. It's a jurisdictional dealing. Now, details like that, when you read that and you don't care about governing well, you don't care about the details of God's law and applying them to things, if you find boring the law of God, I assure you, if you get power, you will find overwhelming the problems of power. But when you have the law of God stored up in your heart, the problems of power become easy to solve because you can be wiser than the ancients, wiser than your teachers, and wiser than your enemies because God is your teacher. And He will make you wise. His word is what makes you wise. You can't lean on your understanding and get wise. You can't just make things up and get wise. You can't just do what you please and be wise. That is will worship. That is the love of self. The love of wisdom looks to God, who is wisdom, and asks him to teach you in humility, knowing that you have no right to control other men and to make them your slaves. You have a duty, if you rule, to rule as service and to sacrifice yourself, to pour yourself out, to be the one who takes the beating of the sun so that they can live in the shade. And so if we seek the favor of kings, it is no guarantee of a good life. Death is a thing that reminds us that all of the favors of this life are passing. And so we must always look for the things that will have value past the point of death. And so Solomon will ensure that we all have a very enjoyable next few weeks as we continue to hear him remind us continuously about dying. So enjoy the rest of that series. Comments, questions, objections from the voting members and those with speaking rights? Let's pray. Father, we ask that you would bless us by the preaching of your word. We ask that you would cause us to know your word, that you would help us to not think that human rulers or power are the solution to all of our problems in life, but instead that you would cause for us to understand that all authority is given to men for service and for your glory, and that you have all power, you have all authority. I ask, Father, that you would build us up and cause us to look